Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. Today our special guest is James Ponti. James is a New York Times bestselling author of 4 middle grade book series. The Sherlock Society follows a group of young detectives. City Spies, about an unlikely squad of 5 kids from around the world who form an elite MI6 spy team. The Edgar Award-winning Framed series, about a pair of tweens who solve mysteries in Washington, D.C., and the Dead City trilogy, about a secret society that polices the undead living beneath Manhattan. His books have appeared on more than 15 different state award lists, and he is the founder of a writers group known as the Renegades of Middle Grade. James is also an Emmy-nominated television writer and producer who has worked for many networks including Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, PBS, History, and Spike TV, as well as NBC Sports. He lives with his family in Orlando, Florida. His new book, Europa, goes on sale February 10th, 2026 from Aladdin. So welcome, James.
Thank you so much for having me.
So
Excited to
jealous.
be
I just
here.
read Florida. I was like, oh, Florida's
Yeah,
so warm
I
right now.
got
In
short
Toronto, it's like
sleeves on, so I
-30.
don't. Yeah, sorry about
Okay.
that.
It's okay. So can you share a little bit about
I'll
how
tell
you...
you, most of the
Okay.
time I'd rather live in Canada than Florida. So you've got me
No,
beat.
no. We'll do a
But
trade one day.
weather's the one thing we've got right now. Yeah.
Okay. Can you share how you got into writing and what drew you to middle grade fiction specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So I always wanted to be a writer. I very specifically remember in fifth grade deciding writer was it for me, and I have never once since that day in 1976 wanted to be anything but a writer. The thing that was uncertain was what type of writer I was going to be. And that's because I was not a strong reader growing up. I love fact-based readings like almanacs, atlases, encyclopedias. I loved, you know, Encyclopedia Brown and short stuff, but novels seemed kind of too hard for me to get through. And so in middle school and high school, started heading towards script writing and did film stuff in school as much as I could and entered play contests and then so I went to college. I majored in screenwriting. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I started my career as a television writer. I wrote for Nickelodeon, Disney Channel, PBS. I did a lot of kids programming. That I did that because that's just where the jobs that I got a chance for opened up. But I quickly found that writing for that age viewer was really in my wheelhouse of interest and humor and things like that. And eventually I got into other parts of TV. And so I would write in this. I became a producer and I worked in documentaries for like History Channel and NBC and these things. And I wanted to write on the side because I always wanted to be a writer. And even though television production had a lot of writing in it, it wasn't the kind of writing I wanted to do.
Well,
And
you're
so I
writing someone
stopped.
else's stuff, right? You're not writing your own stuff,
Well,
right?
yeah. Or even if I write a documentary, I'm writing narration, or I'm writing with the camera, or but I'm not doing the stuff that I really wanted to do. And so I started writing books on the side. And I think because of my life at Nick and Disney and PBS, it seemed right for me to write for this age group, and it really has been a fit. I can't imagine now doing anything else.
Okay, so you have multiple series, the Sherlock Society, City
Yeah.
Spies. I mean, oh gosh. I mean, how did it start? I mean, you start off with one, finish that series, and then you go to
Yeah,
another,
yeah.
or...
So I think because of the TV background, series writing kind of made sense to me, as opposed to writing a one-off standalone novel, which is I think what most people would start and think to do. But I guess I was interested in the idea of I want a group of characters in a really interesting setting, and I want to see all the different places you can go with that. And so the first thing I did is I wrote Dead City, and I was 2 books into that when I pitched the idea for my next one for when that one ended, and then I just segued straight from Dead City into Framed, and then I did the same thing. And then now what we decided was I left television completely during COVID and just switched all to writing. And so I thought, well, geez, I'm giving up a full-time job. Writing was still up. So that's up through the first City Spies book was something I did on nights and weekends. So I'm going to have all this spare time. So why don't I write 2 series at once? This is, I don't know where my brain was. And so I pitched the idea for Sherlock to go simultaneously with City Spies, thinking that at the time City Spies was probably like almost running its strength. And City Spies just kept getting more popular than Sherlock, and all of a sudden it's like I'm doing 2 books a year, and it for some reason is way more time consuming than I thought it was going to be in the thing. So I am just always scrambling back and forth. But I love them both, and both are going strong. Both have good readership, and both have a lot of things that I still want to say with them. So, there will be at least 10 City Spies. I like to say I think there'll probably be 12 in the end, and at least four, and probably at least I think maybe six Sherlock. So it'll be going on for a little while with the two of them at once.
How
So
did
it's
you
kind of a
manage? Uh-huh.
yeah.
Oh,
Go,
sorry. I
go.
was gonna say, how did you manage to get them published? Like you were working as a TV writer, and
Yeah,
then
I was working as a TV producer then. So what happened is, and that's why I wanted to write because I wasn't really writing anymore. And that was the thing from fifth grade on that I wanted to be. When I worked at Nickelodeon, we had a tie-in show. Like we had a show that was popular, and I'm saying a tie-in book series. And so they come and they said, oh, we're gonna have this book series based on this television, based on the television series. And we had two writers on the staff, and we both said we want to write one of those books. And they're like, well, you're not really those kind of writers, are you? And we're like, well, certainly we know the show. And so I wrote one of those, and then they liked it, and I wrote two more of those. And so to keep the writing parts of my brain working, I just started on the side doing a side hustle of writing like intellectual property stuff. So I would
Mhm.
write Disney movies. I would do the novelization or books based on a television series or something like that. And so I was doing that, and that helped pay for tuition for my kid to go through private school and then into college. And then I thought, I really like doing this. I want to do this more seriously. So I just reached out to one of them and I said, hey, you have me do these. I can write. I didn't have an agent at the time, even. I said, I have an idea for a book. I want to send it to you. And then I also sent it to an agent on the same day. And then it worked out. And so she's my agent and they're my publishing house. And so, it's really a backdoor, odd way in. I don't normally talk about it because it frustrates some writers because I didn't
Yeah,
have
you struggle
the
enough.
I struggled, but I didn't
Yeah.
struggle in the way of finding someone. Wendy Mass is a good friend of mine, and Wendy's a great writer. And we did an event together, and she pulled out like she has this roll where she has all her rejection letters, and she's laminated
Yes.
them together, and it just goes
Oh,
endlessly. And
yeah.
then she's like, well, how many rejection letters did you get, James? And I don't answer. I'm like, actually, I got published by the first place that I sent it to, and I got picked up by the first agent that I sent it to, the only one. So I don't know. So I always joke that I don't know the business because I didn't do the research you should. I just kind of fell into an opportunity and then clung to it. And so I was doing on a book tour. I was in New York and I had an event in Connecticut, but I had to come back to New York for the next day. And so Simon&Schuster just had a driver take me back and forth. And so my editor said, well, I'll go with you, because you're coming back. So it's not like I'm going to get stuck in Connecticut. You can come back. And so it was great. So I get in the car and I have a 4-hour drive with my editor. And I said, I've got really bad news for you. And she's like, what? I go, I have you locked in a car at 3 hours. It goes for 3 hours. You're going to teach me the publishing business because I don't understand how any of this works. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, everyone talks about things and I don't know what they're saying. I don't know the terms. I don't know the positions. I don't know anything. And so she gave me Pub 101 on the way out and then again on the way back. And now I can fake my way through it.
Okay, now let's talk about your latest book. It's the City Spies, number 7, Europa. So can you tell us a little bit about what inspired the story?
Sure. Well, so City Spies is the idea of City Spies is that a British secret agent, and this happens before the first book, but the setup of it is a British secret agent and his wife is also a secret agent. They're on a mission, and the mission goes bad, and she thinks he is killed. And she thinks she's going to get blamed, and she's super worried about their kids. And so she rushes back to London, takes the kids, and disappears as only an MI6 agent can disappear. Like he really disappears and hides these kids. But it turns out he lives. He escapes the fire, and so he starts searching for his kids. And in the process finds other kids in danger and in need, and he can't turn his back on them. And eventually they become this family. He adopts them, and they're a family he raises as spies, right? And it's kind of inspired by I come from a really weird background, and I found out more about my background during like in between books 3 and 4, but it's stuff that I'd always assumed. I never met my father. I was
Oh,
raised by my mother. I was born in Italy. I was raised by my mother in America. And there was the story of that he had died, but I didn't think that was true. And I would make up these stories about what's going
maybe he's a
on.
spy. Yeah.
Um, as it turned out, my father had 3 secret families in America, plus the family in Italy. And I all of a sudden, like one day, I got 9 new siblings. Um,
Wow, he's a busy
but
man.
I didn't know that at the time, but it was kind of the idea of my father never came to look for me. So I wanted to write about a guy who would move around, go around the world to find his kids. And so it kind of comes from this idea of, yeah, it's about spies and it's about missions and mysteries and fun stuff and gadgets. But to me, it's really about a family and what is a real family? Because I grew up with brothers with a different father and different last name, but they didn't know their dad really. My mom just had us and we were different. And it's like, I wanted to write about that. So I wrote about that family, but I made them spies. And so in Europa, I really want to avoid formulaic stuff with these books. So I try to find different setups, different orders. I want it to be familiar to readers. So, we're gonna get humor and we're gonna get action and we're gonna have some big stuff. But I don't want it to. So I thought, one thing that would be really fun is to break up the team so they don't have each other to rely on, so they don't have the father figure to rely on. And so the plot that I came up with is Umbra, who is the evil organization in these books, like Spectre and James Bond, or like Spider and Stu Gibbs' Spy School books. They're attacking 4 cities in Europe at once. And so the team has to spread out
Hmm.
to try to stop these attacks. And so really it was a way for me to mix and match the siblings and have them find new things about themselves could without their normal reliable, well, Paris will take care of that. No, Paris is not with you, you're going to have to take care of that kind of thing. And so that was just the idea. I'm always looking for a new way to set up what they're going through and what they're doing. And so now for my wife, it is by far her favorite book
Oh,
that I've
your
written.
wife reads your books.
Yeah, well, she reads every chapter as I write every chapter, but she
Wow.
helps me research. And so to research, we had to go to Amsterdam and Paris and Rome and London. And
Oh,
so she was all over that. She's like, let's do a sequel. Let's do another one where we do Barcelona, Berlin, Vienna, and Copenhagen. Let's really take this story. So she loved it. No, my wife is amazing. She was a journalism major in school. She was a great editor.
hmm.
She's a high school history teacher now, and she reads. She's an avid reader, and she reads each chapter. When I'm done, and if she says something's wrong, she never tells me what's wrong because she says, "I if I knew how to tell you what to do, I would be a writer." She goes, "I could just tell you that this doesn't excite me like it should,"
Yeah.
and I
Oh,
usually
that's
know what
amazing.
it is. I know what it
Yeah.
is, and I go back through and on and on. So yeah, and it's great because she's my college sweetheart. So we've been together since I was learning how to write, and so she she knows my writing, she knows me, she knows all of it. 36, 38 years of this now we've done together.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'm hitting my
Yeah,
20th next year. So,
yeah,
or
there you
this year
go.
actually. Oh, I forget. So
It's
this year, 20th
they,
year.
they add up.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all just it's forever, right?
Yeah,
At
it's
a
a
certain
blur.
point,
Yeah.
it's hard to remember pre. It's not, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Now, with multiple series ongoing, how do you manage to keep the characters and plots, um, I guess in order, like when you write each series? Like, do you ever get confused?
No, and there's a couple of things, and some of these are intentional, some of these I lucked into. But so the Sherlock Society is about 2 kids whose last name is Sherlock, their grandfather and their 2 best friends, and they solve mysteries around Miami. A lot of real mysteries are used in that, and Miami's just a great source of mysterious criminal activity. So there are very different tones in the stories.
Hmm.
For one, the city spies are trying to save the world. The Sherlock Society is trying to fix Miami. So the scale is different. The City Spies are trying to stop something from happening. The Sherlock Society is trying to figure out what did happen.
Like
So there's a time perspective. Sherlock Society is told in third person. I'm sorry, City Spies is told in third person. The Sherlock Society is narrated by the main character. And the final thing is the City Spies are it's the family that I grew up in. The
Mhm.
kid without the father, trying to figure that. The Sherlock Society is the family my wife and I raised. And so those different dynamics at their core make them very separate in my head. Even though both have mysteries, both have plot twists, sometimes I'll think of an idea and say, that would actually be better for the Sherlock Society than for the cities. I'll do some of that. But they are so different that they're pretty easy to segment in my head and
Okay.
segregate in my head. And so, what I do need though is when I switch from writing one to writing the other, I need a week of not writing
Mhm.
to kind of reset my
Yeah.
brain. And so there's just a lot of like bad food and redoing my website and
Yeah.
celebrate
Okay.
maybe with a milkshake or two that I shouldn't have, and then I'm ready. Then I'm ready to jump back in with a different voice.
Okay. Now, how do you balance writing for a younger audience with these complex storylines? Like, do you ever think something's too scary for them? Like, is there a line before
Well,
it becomes
you know,
adult fiction?
I I think about that a lot.
Okay.
I think about that a lot, and I'm amazed at how much I don't change things. The plots are really complicated,
Hmm.
but they are accessible, right? It's complicated doesn't mean abstract and obtuse and different. It's the way things go together. So as long as I'm presenting, the kids have never complained about how complex the mystery is, how complex the mission is. I think that's the real bonus of my time, especially at Nickelodeon. When I was at Nickelodeon, kids were held in awe.
Hmm.
We don't write down to kids. I remember the very first we got a book when you started there. It's called How to Nickelodeon, and it's like the rules of what we do. And rule number two, I think it was never ever ever write the word fun because every kid in the world knows if you say it's fun, it's not. You're having to convince them.
Hmm.
Just be fun. And I think about that a lot. I think about the fact that, a lot of times, and I'll see people, and not to call anyone out, but like sometimes I'll see an adult author who thinks, oh, wouldn't it be great to write for kids? And basically what they do is they take their ideas and they dumb them down. And kids don't respond because kids know when you're dumbing down to them. What they don't know is they don't know some cultural references. They don't know, you know, abstract vocabulary sometimes. But you can work that in a way that's not insulting, and then they're along for the ride. And I tell you, I love to read mysteries. I love to read mystery fiction, and I read really great ones, and I read some that are good, and I watch a ton of, like, I watch so much British mystery that I honestly think the only other job that I could have is being an assistant casting director at the BBC because I know so well. Oh no, no, he's much better as a coroner than that guy because he was a coroner in Vera, and then he was also a coroner on an episode of Shetland, and he was a
Oh, I
scientist
love
in
Shetland.
Endeavor.
Yes.
Yeah, they're great, right? And so, but sometimes I'll see stuff, and I tell my wife, I go, my readers would never let me get away with that leap they just made.
Hmm?
My writers would never, because as adults, we just kind of accept, I joke that the Blue Bloods is a show my wife and I happen to like, which is this, cop show. And I joke, it's like, they always talk about the 35,000 police officers in New York City. And I tell my wife, I go, but only three of them ever work. Because we
Yeah.
see the same three in every, because we accept that. We accept that in a TV show.
Yeah.
Kids don't
Yeah.
accept that. Kids read books over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And they figure out the plot and they will come. I was at an event in Milwaukee. It was my first time ever in Milwaukee. And it was like 5 minutes before the event started, but I feel super awkward. There's a crowd there, and I'm like, I'm not going to sit in front of you and not talk until the time, but we don't want to really start before
Yeah.
people get here. So I said, okay, we're gonna have pre-fun. So everyone's going to forget this when everyone else is here, but for the next 10 minutes, whatever, we're just going to do questions and answers. And if you specifically ask me something I'm going to talk about later, I'll say I'll get to that later. And this girl raises her hand, eagerly raises her hand, and she says, so when did Robert's eyes get better and his asthma go away? And I'm like, what? And Robert is a character who joined the team in book 5, but was talked about in book 1. It's actually his real children, mother's real children, real son, his birth or biological son rather. And in the thing I had mentioned in passing in the sentence that he had asthma and wore glasses. And this girl now had read the book that he appears in, and there's a picture in the back, and he's not wearing glasses, and he never once had a breathing problem. And she didn't do that as an aha. Well, Robert obviously had LASIK surgery, and his time in Egypt helped clear out clear out the asthma problem, but he still uses an inhaler on occasions. I just haven't mentioned that in the manuscript. But it just showed me that the detail that kids put. So yeah, no, I don't worry about complexity. Scariness, yeah, I don't want to scare kids, but I don't want to scare myself either. The things I most worry about are copycat.
Mm-hmm.
I joke with my wife or with my editor. I said, I have no problem with them disassembling a bomb, but they're never going to touch a gun because a kid could touch a gun. A kid's not going to get to assemble a bomb. Um, I even have trouble with them picking up like a rock, like something you could throw. It's like I want them to do, and when we sold the movie rights, that was the only rule I had. Not that you could have rules. I said this for me is the thing that has to be. Um, no kid can ever hold a gun in any of these. If they make the movie, which I know is a long shot, but there can never be a thing.
Yeah.
I don't want a kid to hold a gun. And then when they sold it, and they absolutely agreed to that. But it's like, other than that, I don't worry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't write about sex and violence and drugs, but I don't really want to.
Yeah.
But I think that's not in the kid world. Violent, there is some violent stuff. I don't write about things that are terror filled. But I avoid that as a reader and viewer. So I don't want kids to have nightmares from the books. But there are real stakes involved, and that's the other part that gets really tricky on this. When I worked on the show at Nickelodeon, I worked on a mystery show there, and it was great fun to do. And and I joked it was about a girl who grandfather ran a bed and breakfast, and so that gave us a rotate. It was called the Mystery Files of Shelby Woo, and it gave us a rotating series of characters that would come into the okay, which was great for a mystery. And I joked after like the second season, I go, man, there's sure a lot of jewel thieves in town, right? Because there
Yeah.
was really strict rules on what kind of crimes we could do.
Yeah.
But jewel thievery was great. But it's like, what is the per capita jewel thievery of, Cocoa Beach, Florida? Because it's out of control. So I want the stakes to be higher than that.
Mhm.
And so I work on that and I balance that and on a lot of things, and they'll get in and out of trouble. And it's like, I don't want to make kids think it's okay to climb the bottom of a bridge. So I'm going to change that, you
Mhm.
know. So I'm trying to be a responsible parent, but it's not a censorship thing. It's just, okay, the goal of this is for kids to read it and go on an adventure. Maybe there's some deeper goals that if they're going on an adventure and having fun and laughing, they don't notice we're modeling certain like, oh wait, that's really how a family should be, or oh that she learned her lesson, or not preachy, but the goal is not to just scare them,
Mhm.
right? It's not just to make absurd things happen because I thought of an absurd thing. So yeah, that's what I wrestle with. That's an incredibly long answer. I apologize.
Okay, I was like, what was the question? I forgot. But
Yeah, I'm the worst. I'm the worst at that.
no, no, no. Okay, now, what advice would you give to aspiring middle grade authors that are starting out?
Okay. I would break that down two ways. Are you talking about adults who would like to write for middle grade or kids who are now middle grade kids that would like to be writers someday? Because the advice is a little bit
You can
different.
answer both, I guess.
If you're an adult or soon to be adult and you see writing as a thing that you'd like to do, I think something I think is true to both. Um and that is first of all what we were talking about. You don't write down to kids. You don't write about A good rule is write something you think you would have wanted to read then. That's what I'm doing. I'm writing books that I wasn't a strong reader, but I would like to think that if I found City Spies, I thought, oh, that I might try this one, right? So write what you'd like to read, write what's in your heart, write the way you talk. That's especially for kids, because I think kids think that when you write, you're supposed to get a thesaurus out and use really impressive language, and it's not. It's supposed to be a dialogue with you and the reader. You can use the right word. I don't think you should use poor language, but it's not about using obsequious or, you know, disenfranchisement or, whatever kind of long word that you think makes it look like, wow, he's a really good writer. It's not about self-importance, it's about telling a story. Um, Tip I would give to everyone is read what you write out loud
Mhm.
a lot. I do that a lot because that's where you find the mistakes, but also that's where you get the flow. One of the things I hear, which that makes me feel good, that people that like my writing say, God, it feels like you're in the room talking to me. And it's like, well, I think that's a good thing. I think because that means you're not getting hung up, even when you're seeing new things or complex ideas. If you pause, or I write about a lot of real places, and I have a feeling that kids are looking up, is this a real thing, or is it, they're
Oh, they
stopping on the
definitely
web.
will do that, the
Yeah,
kids.
but I want it to flow and not. I want the words to flow. So that's important. For kids, especially, and somewhat for adults to do this, I'd like to talk about marathon running for a moment. If you wanted to run a marathon and you'd never run before, you would not go out and run 26 miles. You would go out and you would run or jog or walk maybe a mile. And you would over time build up the muscles and build up the stamina and build up the ability and then train. And you don't get to 26 miles for a long time. Yet so many people say, I'm going to write a novel. And they start to write a novel. And they peter out around page 30. Or they get lost in the middle. It's the exact same thing. You don't just start writing this behemoth thing, because just like if you went out and first day tried to run a marathon, you would think this just is never going to work. Or if you got through it, you wouldn't get through it in any skillful way. So write a short story, write a poem, write an interview, write something creative, write a play, write a scene, write a chapter that stands alone. Write smaller things to develop the skills and finish them. Because the difference between someone who wants to be a writer and someone who is a writer is finishing. Writers finish what they start. People, oh, I have 6 different books going. I'm like, man, then you've got none. I don't say that because I don't want to be discouraging. But in my head, I'm like, if you've got 6 different things going, that means you keep hitting that same spot. So you keep thinking, I'll start over with this. And all those ideas might be totally worthy ideas, but you're not ready to write it yet. Or more than likely, you have 6 ideas that, if they came together, might be one book if you could figure out how to connect them, because you're getting the exciting part, that initial idea, that burst, and the clever little part here, and all like that. And then the last thing I would say is start the story as late as possible, end it as early as possible. That's I learned that in film school, and I think that holds true in a lot of ways. I think we get caught up in the prep work of writing, in the well, I'm going to come up with the backstories and this and that, and we just throw in so much exposition, and I am still guilty of it. 15 books in, no, just start the story, and you figure out ways to tell that stuff along the way, and it's going to be much more clever, and it's going to grab you more. You know, right now, some of my favorite, there are a lot of popular writers in middle grade, and I don't have this prepped in my head, so I don't know how many I'll pull up with, but we'll go with like Stuart Gibbs, who writes Spy School, and Max Brallier, who writes Last Kids on Earth, Shannon Messenger, who writes Keeper of the Lost City, Suzanne Collins, who writes The Hunger Games, um, Victoria Aveyard, who writes The Red Queen. That's 5 real quick. Me, I'll throw myself in there. We all started as script writers. We
Mm.
all started in television or film and then moved over into writing books. And I think one of the reasons and they're all way more successful than me, is that storytelling of visual, quick, get with it. That doesn't mean we're writing television. It just means we're writing at pace and we're starting the story as late as we can and we're moving through and the dialogue is realistic and not overly information based. So think of that kind of structure of like, how would I want this story? For me, it helps. I think of it as a movie in my head, but that's because that's my background. That may not be how everyone does it. But any of those tricks would help. But mostly, more than anything, write what you love and write about it the way you talk. And that's really a solid beginning point. Because that combination is unique to you. So that means the story that you tell, only you could tell.
I want to ask you a question about the Renegades of Middle Grade. So, why did you start that?
Well, I haven't, we haven't done much lately. It's still, if you go on the website, you can find us, and it's, I think, a great resource. And we've talked about what more we could do. It's just, we're all really kind of busy, but it was born out of the idea that so much of writing business is saying, look at me, look at me, look at this new book, or going on social media and doing that. And so many of us pick this job because it's like, oh, it's great. I get to be alone in a room and I don't have to talk to anybody. So it's like this odd thing where like these introverts are being forced to this very extroverted kind of component. And so I thought, I feel really awkward saying, hey, look at my book. But I have no problem talking about my friend Karina Glazer and say, hey, look at her book. It's amazing. And so what I thought would be fun is like, what if we made this little silly named group, the Renegades of Middle Grade, because we are all very not renegade, and we talked about each other's stuff. And that was a way for us to do that. And then it's just kind of a way and we would do special events every now and then. Like we'll do a Valentine's thing where you can get on, we'll all talk about our new books on Valentine's Day or something like that. And so that's what started it. And then it just became this thing. What I didn't want it to be is I think some writers feel left out, and I don't want anyone to be left out. And then keeping the website was all me, and it became too time consuming. And so we've not done much, but we still call each other the Renegades and we still do stuff together unofficially. And I think we're going to figure out ways to kind of tap back into that and take advantage of that.
Okay, cool. All right, so at this point, you're going to do a bit of a reading for us. Can you give us a
Sure.
bit of context of what you're reading, and then you can start?
Sure. I'm going to read the opening chapter from City Spies Europa. So as I said, I think at one point, Umbra is the evil group at the heart of all the crimes in the City Spies books, because I didn't want to make it ever be about a country or nationality or an ethnicity. So the bad guys aren't from any one place. They're just bad guys who are driven by economics more than they are by ideology and their global crime syndicate. Well, their leader is Le Fantôme, the Phantom. No one really knew who he was, whatever, pulling all the strings. Well, at the end of the previous book, he was captured and arrested in London. And so this book starts with him in prison. Because just because he's in jail doesn't mean he's out of the story. So, chapter one, here we go. His Majesty's Prison, Belmarsh. And Le Fantôme's real name is Lucien Allard. Lucien Allard was in a hurry, which was never a good thing to be in prison. He took a deep breath to calm himself and looked at his reflection in the mirror, or at least what passed for one at HMP Belmarsh. Actual mirrors weren't allowed because they could be shattered and their shards used as weapons. Instead, he stared into a dull metal rectangle, the size of a book that made his face look like it was part of an abstract painting. How had he fallen so far? As the leader of the global crime syndicate Umbra, he was used to traveling the world in style, eating gourmet meals and sleeping in one of his luxury homes. Now he subsisted on prison food and spent most of his hours confined to a cell that was 6 feet by 10 feet. He was in a hurry, all right, a hurry to get out. Guard, he called through the small slat in his door. The problem was no one had ever escaped from the high security unit at Belmarsh. The HSU was the prison within a prison where the United Kingdom housed its most dangerous criminals. Allard had counted no fewer than 20 gated doors, many with built-in time delays, that he had passed through to reach this cell. Getting out would be virtually impossible. Virtually. Guard, he called out again. Settle down, bellowed a corrections officer named Blanton, as his ruddy face appeared in the opening. What do you want? I want dinner at the Wolseley, Allard replied. Steak au poivre, to be precise, but I guess I'll have to settle for a tepid cup of Earl Grey here in the Spur. Belmarsh may have been the most notorious prison in Britain, but it was still British. Afternoon tea was practically considered a basic human right. 5 minutes, the guard instructed as he unlocked the door to let him out. That's not even enough time for it to steep properly, Allard replied. Maybe not at the Wolseley, replied Blanton, with a chuckle. But here at the HSU, it's the exact right amount of time. Allard smirked. You know you're a barbarian. And according to the missus, my communication skills aren't what they should be. Allard laughed as he stepped into the corridor. We are all works in progress. Despite their notorious past, the 14 inmates in the HSU tended to get along well with the guards, a necessity when spending so much time in such tight quarters. Because of this, the officers were only allowed to work in the unit for 3 years before being transferred to another part of the prison. This was to ensure that none developed too close a bond with the men they were supposed to be supervising. The cells were laid out in 4 spurs joined together in a common area with a small television and a kitchenette that had a microwave and a toaster. This was necessary because HSU inmates were not allowed in the cafeteria where they could interact with prisoners from the general population. Rather than a mug, Lucian had a paper cup, and instead of a kettle, there was a dispenser that provided water that was warm, if not exactly hot. We're out of sugar, said Allard, holding up an empty bowl. There's more in the cupboard, answered Blanton. Allard opened the cabinet to reveal 3 bags of sugar. He took the one marked with a small blue dot and turned his body ever so slightly so that it blocked the guard's view while he refilled the bowl. As he did, he dipped his fingers into the crystals and pulled out a phone. He paid £15,000 to have it smuggled into the £15,000 to have it smuggled into the prison, making this quite likely the most expensive cup of tea in history. He deftly tucked the phone between his upper arm and body, which obscured it from view a few moments later when he returned to his cell. Allard walked slowly because no one was ever in a rush to get back inside, and he didn't want to arouse suspicion. I don't suppose I could sit outside and drink this on the patio, he asked. You mean a concrete slab surrounded by steel mesh? Blanton replied as he reopened the cell for him. You know the answer to that. Can't blame a man for trying. During his time atop the most wanted list of law enforcement agencies around the world, Allard had been so elusive and mysterious that he was known as Le Fantôme, the ghost. Now he was simply inmate SS1230AA. It had been a titanic fall from power, and in return he planned to exact revenge on the people responsible for causing it. Later that night, well after lights out, he slipped the phone out of its new hiding place in his mattress and sent a simple 2-word text that set in motion his plan to bring about retribution and freedom. Activate Lazarus. And that's the start. And Lazarus, we will find out what that is. But Le Fantôme is planning to basically hold Europe hostage so that he can get released from prison.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you very much for sharing. I mean, do you know how many books is in a series? Like, do you have a number in mind when you start? No? Okay.
No, I hope there's enough to be able to really write about the characters. So I did 2 series of 3, but this one from the beginning I was hoping to go longer, and it's we're at 7 now, and I'm writing 8, and I know we're going to do at least 9 and 10. So it's fun to go. It's fun to grow with the characters, and it's fun to grow with the readers because the kids who've been reading this series have aged 6 years since it started. If they started at the beginning, and so the characters are aging not quite as quickly as the readers are, but both perspectives are changing, and that's really fun to write about.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Sure, of course. My pleasure. Thank you so very much.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay safe.